Many young Americans like me in the 1960s and 70s had opportunities to work or study in foreign countries through the Peace Corps, study abroad programs, voluntary service organizations, or just casual travel bumming around the world. Of course, many other Americans faced much more dangerous foreign assignments, voluntarily or involuntarily, by serving in the Vietnam War, or as many Vietnamese, of course, call it the American War. It all depends on how you look at it, which is one of the points of this talk. Alas, for many students today, study abroad or casual travel bumming around the world may be unaffordable, and the Peace Corps may be unrealistic. For those today who serve the country, our country in the military, life abroad, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, can be pretty dangerous. It's probably hard to develop much empathy for local people when you're dodging IEDs, artillery, rockets, and suicide bombers. Yet it is interesting that many Vietnam vets developed a deep interest in that country and have traveled back to visit Vietnam. Today there are thousands of American veterans in the Vietnam War who, for a variety of reasons, are living and working in Vietnam, sometimes in partnership with former Viet Cong soldiers. Some of you may spend time abroad as part of your careers, even though you may not expect that now. My youngest son, whose college roommate was from Ireland, has traveled in Europe, sojourned in India, and now lives and works in Beijing. While one of his best friends from Preble High School teaches in South Korea, and another Preble friend worked for several years in London. None of them planned to do this, of course, when they were back at Preble. My sister and her family lived in Indonesia for many years when my brother-in-law worked for an oil company. My advice to young people who have the means and the time and are unburdened by mortgages and family responsibilities is to travel abroad while you're young. Yeah, go for it. Hitchhike through Europe, teach English in Japan, study Spanish in Mexico or art in Paris, volunteer for an environmental or health project in Africa, or escape to a South Sea island and become a beach bum. My goal when I was about 16 years old, and maybe even now, I can see my wife Kathy looking alarmed as I mention this, I think that's in her plans. While travel helps, it's possible to stay at home and learn something about foreign cultures through, of course, classes, books, supporting international organizations, working with refugees and immigrants, and meeting foreign visitors. Historians should also go beyond their comfort zone and cross borders to enhance their own intellectual tools and overcome parochial viewpoints. Specialists in the United States ought to learn something about the histories of and the historical approaches favored by other cultures, or pursue comparative studies of the U.S. and another country. Similarly, historians of East Asia or Africa or Europe or any region or country should acquire some familiarity with another part of the world, and some certainly do. This border crossing gives us new perspectives while allowing us to see our own specialization in new ways. Critics here and abroad have often viewed American approaches to the study of psychology, political science, and economics as shaped by ethnocentric biases that assume that American attitudes and behaviors are the norm, are universal, even as anthropologists have richly shown that they are not. This criticism, while perhaps overly general, supports the Carlos Fuentes argument that Americans are much better at understanding our own society than others. Just as I would encourage students to explore the world, I would urge faculty in any field to pursue opportunities to study or teach or work abroad for a while to gain a broader perspective. My personal experiences contributed to my appreciation for connecting with other cultures. I was fortunate to grow up in the 1940s and 50s in Pasadena, a multicultural suburb of Los Angeles. Thanks to a wonderful local Asian art museum, I became fascinated by the gorgeous Chinese landscape paintings that showed misty mountains and placid waters. I vowed that someday I would see these enchanting scenes for myself. While an undergraduate, I had a chance to begin crossing cultural boundaries, spending a semester studying in historic Salzburg, Austria. My first opportunity to travel widely in Western and Eastern Europe, visit wonderful cities like Venice, Prague, Amsterdam, an inspiring institution such as the Louvre Museum in Paris, the British Museum in London, and of course the holy grail for any red-blooded, beer-loving American undergraduate, the Hofbrauhaus in Munich. It was eye-opening to meet people of varied ages and backgrounds in Europe whose political or religious views were very different, sometimes radically so, from those of most Americans. Lesson: not everyone thinks like Americans and has the same assumptions about the world. I then enjoyed a junior year abroad at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, which was then a British colony, an experience that deepened my interest in China and Asia. Hong Kong also had some misty mountains that resembled somewhat the landscape paintings I had so loved back in that Pasadena museum. In Hong Kong, I made friends with Chinese students from Southeast Asia, whose parents, grandparents, great-grandparents had immigrated to Southeast Asia years earlier, especially students from Malaysia, and I became fascinated with that diverse region. In Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and Japan, I encountered even more cultural and intellectual differences than I saw in Europe, from people heirs to ancient traditions unfamiliar to most Americans. China and the Chinese diaspora became, for me, a lifelong passion, and I developed an abiding love of Chinese and other Asian cuisines. As I often tell my students, China, they probably are tired of hearing it, but China, with its huge population, its political clout, its rapidly growing economy, will remain important for a very long time. Americans need to learn much more about this dynamic, but frankly flawed, and sometimes exasperating nation. Of course, they find us pretty exasperating, too. As a market, China is, as American businessmen trying to sell in China put it, the land of 1 billion toothbrushes and 2 billion armpits. We sell them many commodities. China also supplies Americans and the world with products of many kinds, from toys and clothes to electronics and industrial parts. You're much more likely to put their stuff in your Christmas stockings than my books, alas. While they also loan us money for our wars, our tax cuts, and our government spending. Some recent books have argued that the U.S.-China connection can be described as superfusion or chimerica, since the two nations together are the axis of the world economy. We may not like China's authoritarian politics, but the two economies have become so intertwined that neither can end the relationship without difficulty. You can see that in the last couple of days, the experiences of President Obama there. For 1,000 years, China was the engine of the Eurasian economy, the cutting edge in the world, perhaps, in government, science, and technology. Although the Chinese today face a lot of serious problems and challenges. Now, after 2 centuries or so of disarray, China is once again regaining its key place in the world, for better or worse. Today, when China sneezes, we may or may not catch cold, but we might want to say Gesundheit. Notice how cleverly I put several different cultures together in that sentence. Yet there was plenty of Western culture in Asia, too. Clearly, then, we needed to understand other cultures, but also how they were reshaped by the forces of globalization and what some critics consider cultural imperialism by Western nations. Hong Kong was and remains an international city. In Japan, I stayed for a while with a student who played flamenco guitar and introduced me to local bluegrass, country, and Hawaiian music groups, none of whose members had ever traveled outside of Japan. They learned their music by listening to imported records. Now, to you in the iPod generation, or demographic here, ask your parents or any geriatric-looking audience members, I see a few around, what phonograph records are. Also ask them, while you're at it, about manual typewriters, whiteout, rotary phones, Kodak Brownie cameras, Burma Shave advertisements, pitching woo, I don't know if anybody still pitches woo, see you later alligator, and 5 and dime stores. Beloved relics from my